Thank you so much for staying with us. It is still iBrandTV Daybreak. I promised you that we will be delving into the main topic of today. And it goes this way. Some Nigerians were reportedly protesting at the headquarters of the Central Bank of Nigeria to demand the resignation and arrest of the CBN governor, Godwin Emefiele, over the new naira notes policy. The protesters, who were sighted at the premises of the Apex Bank holding placards, noted that Emefiele had inflicted undue hardship on Nigerians, which had allegedly led to the death of many Nigerians. The group reportedly vowed to occupy the Apex Bank's premises until their demands were met. Some of the inscriptions on their placards read, "Emefiele must go, CBN now bureau the change. Emefiele, bring out the names of those you gave our money to. Where is the 500 billion naira you cried on tape is missing? What happened to Anchor Borough's program?" And many other inscriptions. To discuss this, have this conversation with us in the studio is Mr. Matthew Oluku. He's a public affairs analyst. He will be joining us here in the studio. But also we have over the phone Mr. Session Okunade, who is a chartered accountant and member of CITN. Good morning, Mr. Session. Welcome.
Good morning, Deborah. Good morning, Sammy. Glad to be here this morning.
All right, let us start this way, Mr. Session. What is your reaction to this entire, controversy around the CBN governor and people protesting and asking that, he be let go?
Thank you very much. I saw the headline this morning, and I think we first need to put the perspective that the CBN governor is working within his ambit. Things may not just work the way it is because the CBN is saddled with the responsibility of the monetary policy, which one of it implies that they have the responsibility of issuing the legal tender currency notes in Nigeria and that of the coins amidst other duties that is expected of them. They are in charge of our debt management, foreign reserves, and all other likes. But let's speak specifically to the legal tender currency, which happened late last year to this early this year, before the CBN gave the directive that they should reintroduce the old currency. What actually happened was that the CBN, sadly, with the responsibility of monitoring and controlling the liquidity in circulation, felt there were too much money out there and strategically brought in the redesigning of the currency in such a way to mop up funds. This is just one of the ways to combat some of the menace that we have in terms of banditry, kidnapping, and the likes. But I think it was not thought through, and it boomerangs because certain expectations were not met. You are trying to call politicians because of the election, forgetting that they are the major game player. And I think I was on set during the election in your station to say that even when the politicians don't ask for the currency, the bankers will definitely take it to them. So you've not achieved anything by saying that you want to actually control the influx of cash that will be spent during the election. Rather, you will be impacting negatively on the masses. And that was what we saw before the intervention of the Supreme Court to say we should revert to the old currency. As a matter of fact, at times we have good policies, but the implementation is always a problem. That's what we're saying with this. But for the people that are carrying placard, I don't think it's to go to CBN to bring their voice, but to approach the employer of the CBN governor, who is the president that appointed him for scorecard what he has done and made those things before him and see whether it's worth continue in office rather than exercising energy, because you will just be looking that you are not the one that employed me, you're only my employer. And we can never say possibly that is the duty or what trying to him by the employer. And it might be having fun, because some of us felt that the way and manner some of these policies has been handled, which is under CBN, are not properly done, and we are having a lot of issues. If you talk about debt management, foreign reserves is been on the other side. Not only the legal tender, the leather currency that is having the issue, it cuts across every monetary policy which is impacting on the businesses of average Nigeria as we speak.
All right, Mr. Session, your perspective have been well taken, but I beg to put you on a pause mode while we bounce back on our guests right here in the studio. Mr. Matthew, looking at the tenure of Mr. Godwin Emefiele as governor of CBN, his tenure will be elapsing on June 2nd, 2024. His scorecard as a governor, would you say his performance overall is abysmal, or has he failed as a governor?
I wouldn't say, once again, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I wouldn't say you have failed, because I think in this part of the world, we have a system where almost all the arms of government agencies, parastatals, irrespective of their rules given to them by the Constitution, is still being state managed, micromanaged from one source.
What source is that?
From the presidency. I'm starting on this note because if we look at the reasons, or rather the major reason we went into recession when this government came on board in 2016 was purely government policy. And it is a credit to the CBN how they managed and navigated Nigeria out of that recession. Nigeria economy haven't grown negatively in 3 consecutive quarters. We saw ourselves a recession. And the reason we went into recession was majorly because we had a president who is decisive and resolute in anything he wants to do, rightly or wrongly. He has with power. I'm talking about TSA. I could remember the then Minister of Finance, I think of Joshua, said that after the mop-up of federal government fund in commercial banks, government realized 3.1 trillion. An economy you mop up 3.1 trillion, it must have shock. So the resultant effect of that shock was the recession we went into. So one would have said, okay, you have a CBN on who is managing the monetary policy and all that, but Mr. President it was his idea because he felt he wanted to fight corruption. So he crashed the economy. So why I'm giving the CBN credit is that within a short while, they were able to manage the economy so that we'll recover from that recession. So to that extent, I think it is a credit to the CBN and all the people who manage the economy. Then again, you look at we are missed, which the federal government have borrowed heavily through that window. Ordinarily, I think both the CBN, the federal government, they have all breached all the external laws that guarantee or that give that opportunity, window of opportunity of borrowing to fund budget deficit. But again, I would have faulted the CBN because what the Constitution says is that federal government cannot borrow more than 5% of, no, if the way I miss, they want to borrow this year now. If they want to borrow this year, their budget, federal government's earning, if it is, they cannot borrow more than 5% of their annual earning. And we have seen federal government borrow heavily more than that figure.
All right.
And again,
Mr. Matthew, sorry to cut you short. You will continue, but let's just finish up with Mr. Session so that we can let him go. Mr. Session, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Deborah, I'm here.
All right. Quickly, just before we let you go, there's been serious demands that, you know, the CBN governor should be brought to book. Do you see do you think that there are criminal ends to, you know, the activities that he has indulged in the past couple of months as regards the cash crunch, the new naira design, and, you know, how he went about the entire process? Do you think there are criminal ends to it and he should be brought to book?
Yeah, I can't trace any criminal element to that act, I must say. It's just a policy that was not thought through, being directed at a specific arm and not looking at other things associated with it. You discover that there are legal requirements fix them. That is the e-payment platform of the commercial bank. Before now, the stress test of some of those things were regarded to be efficient to withstand the pressure. But we discovered with the advent, the introduction of the cash crunch policy, the majority of them failed that stress test. And that was what put that enormous pressure on the policy of CBN that makes it look as if it was a failure. There is no criminal element. People can just be speculating that foul plays as regard that particular thing. If you listen to CBN critically, they rely solely on the things that the commercial banks or the financial institutions are actually brought to bear that they can withstand the pressure. I'm sure you reach me with one of the things that people are encouraged to do. But the e-payment platform internet banking and also, and the pressure was enormous. There's someone that they withdraw of 20,000 once a day. Now those are think of paying his Baba 500 naira, 1,000 naira. You want to buy, so you can do like transition of as much as 20 in a day because you don't have the cash with you. And that puts so much pressure on the commercial bank, which their promises were not actually up to task, and they admitted to that at the bank as well. So there is no criminal element where we'll be bringing the PN governor to book. On the certain third party information because it doesn't have to do on those application of the bank, but he got his finger dropped, and that's why till now we still have the correct, you know, fully saying some of the things. I've read that the protesters are saying that it's criminal for us to spend two currencies simultaneously. That is rumors, is wrong. But we think in UK that is applicable because they think their currency because that is no more there is no criminal element in all that they've done. But there is a policy that was not thought through that actually boomerang on them.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Session, for coming on the show this morning. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and thank you very much, Sammy, for having me.
All right. You're welcome. Let's get back to you, Mr. Matthew. You know, you were telling us about, you know, how you feel about the CBN governor's performance so far. Please go ahead.
Okay. If you look at during COVID-19 crisis, lockdown, you agree with me that if not for the prudent management ability of the CBN and the CBN governor, we may have had serious crisis of economy. Because Nigeria happened to be operating on a mono economy. I'm not saying there's no other economic activities going on in other sector, but if you look at Nigeria majorly, it's like a mono economy. So if I'm looking at it holistically, I think under this current difficult circumstances, the CBN, I think they perform way above average.
All right, now looking at the events that have played out in the last couple of months, say the last 6 to 7 or 8 months, as the case may be, there are a lot of reactions, especially from the public, that the CBN governor has been, rather partisan, especially in areas where we see him, especially contesting for the highest office of the land while still sitting as the governor of CBN. What's your view on that?
I think I have to, though I'm not holding brief for anybody, but I think I have to debunk that impression because from what I understand, as at the last count, he never contested. He only indicated.
But we saw some branded buses in his name.
You would have allowed me to go on with my line of thought.
Yeah, please, before you continue, he also bought the ticket, the primaries ticket, right? So what does that entail?
I'm still maintaining my position that he never contested.
Okay.
He intended to contest. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Go ahead.
They haven't said that. I think there are persons who feel they want to invoke the jurisdiction of the court to determine whether he offended the constitution or not. And I think we had people who went to court. So, as at the last count, I'm not aware that he was indicted or convicted by any court of competent jurisdiction. So I cannot sit here and sit on appeal or judgment on a case that is pending in the court or pass judgment on an individual that has not been indicted.
But do you think it is constitutionally allowed as a sitting CBN governor that should be independent, now showing interest to vie for the office, for the highest office of the land by indicating his interest of getting the ticket?
Since it's a subject of litigation, it will prejudice for me to start passing judgment. If you are seeking opinion on an issue that is pending before a court of competent jurisdiction, it will be prejudice for me to start addressing it, because these are the relief the court will address. If I start addressing it here and consume myself into a court, which the Constitution frowns at.
Okay, but do you feel like, because part of the conversations coming from the end of the public is that the CBN governor has been compromised from, what you just mentioned, how that you cannot comment on whether he contested or not because he's still in court.
No, I confirm that he didn't contest.
So whether
he attempted to contest.
But, the
and
fact...
consequent upon that, some persons went to court. And most of those cases are pending in court. So you don't expect me to start giving judgment on an issue that is pending before a court.
So word on the street, where I was going with that thought is, word on the street is that, there's been a lot of distrust right now as regards the CBN governor, seeing that a lot of people do not have the understanding of what you just explained about how that he never contested. But, the fact that he put out that word out there and, saying, buying the ticket and the branded buses that we saw at some point kind of put off a lot of people on the outside. And this is somebody that is supposed to be independent. Electoral materials are supposed to be kept safe in a CBN vault. Do you understand? And this same person is supposed to want to participate in the elections. And, all the shenanigans that happened with the cash crunch and the naira redesign. Would you blame people out there who feel like this man has been compromised and shouldn't continue to be our CBN governor?
It's not about blame, it's about perception. Because if you look at the policy you just mentioned, Mr. President and the office of the president were unequivocal about their position, that they gave approval for the policy. And you agree with me that if not, I understand the hardship that came with the policy and how court rose to the occasion to give judgment, which CBN have currently complied with. But you agree with me that as a CBN, you have responsibility of monetary policy, that you needed to have control of the money in circulation. And that if you are not having total control of the money in circulation, that your policies in terms of money policy may not be effective. And if you want your money policy to be effective, you need to devise a means to address or control the money in circulation. I think that's what the Emefiele wanted to achieve. But along the line, we saw so many challenges that could not make the thing succeed. We understood even at a point, politicians were even having the new naira note that is supposed to be meant for the public, that is supposed to be in circulation. But those are history, because as we understand currently, the CBN have been compelled by Supreme Court to circulate the old naira note, and that order have been complied with. I don't think naira scarcity is a challenge now. That is why I begin to feel that anyone calling for CBN's governor's resignation at this point is being political. It has some political undertone, because otherwise you would have asked for the Mr. President to resign. Because Mr. President gave the approval, and Mr. President came out to defend the policy, and at every point in time, Mr. President addressed the nation to prove that it was a brainchild of his office.
Now, when you say the CBN has been compelled, especially with regards to the fact that now there are currency in circulation, and you called it, you know,
Compulsion.
history, as the case may be.
Okay.
Now, are you aware that there are reactions in the air that the new naira note that is supposed to run concurrently with the old naira note has ceased to be in circulation? What's your view on that?
You're asking whether I'm aware. It's a function of, I can testify that I seldom see the new naira notes.
Why is that so?
That is what we need to add the CBN. If they are withdrawing it, they should recirculate it. Because as long as we are concerned with what we are made to understand, that the new naira note and the old naira note, they should run side by side, they should run concurrently. Two of them are still legal tender.
Okay, but you know, it's, I don't want to say it is funny, because it's not. But it was supposed to be running concurrently, both the old naira notes and the new naira notes. And this brings me back to the question I was trying to ask earlier. This whole conversation around new naira redesign notes, the political end of things to it, is it really not political? The fact that, you know, that it was a knee-jerk approach to even bringing up this policy in the first place. I mean, how do you redesign an entire country's, you know, notes in 3 months? And there's been how that several parastatals who are supposed to be a major part of this process were sidelined. It was mostly like a CBN governor and the president thing. It was just both of them, you know, making the decisions and deciding on it. Do you think that this is really for the good of the country, or was it really political?
Except you educate us on other government parastatals and agencies that were sidelined. But the much I can understand is, if you look at the way Nigerian government is being run, the way you manage the currency, we have Nigerian Printing and Minting Press that have responsibility to mint currency. It's a subsidiary of CBN. So if you have an ND of Nigerian Printing and Minting Press, and CBN wrote to Office of Mr. President seeking to redesign naira notes, and Mr. President gives approval, and they revert to Nigerian Printing and Minting Press to print SY quantity. So I don't know, that's why I say except educate us on the areas of the ministries and agencies or parastatals that were sidelined. But I can understand that at the point the Minister of Finance was trying to exonerate herself whether she was not in the know. But I am not unaware that the permanent secretary under the Minister of Finance is a statutory member of CBN board, and that the issue of naira note, redesign of naira note, the policy would have been discussed at the level of CBN board before even writing Mr. President. So to that extent, the office of the Minister of Finance cannot feign ignorance of the policy. So I say you educate us on other areas where an agency of government, a parastatal, was sidelined. I'm not aware.
But if she was saying that she's not in the know of, you know, such a very important policy, and there is somebody under her who is supposed to be in the board at CBN, then where is the misinformation coming from?
There is no misinformation. It's purely political. Perhaps she was playing politics. Because if the permanent secretary in your ministry represents you,
but is that not an indictment? Is that not an indictment?
You may call it indictment. That is what you choose to use indictment.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say in essence is, if you have your representative, your permanent secretary, as a member of CBN board, and they come back at every point in time where they have meeting, and is expected to brief you. If he didn't brief you and you choose to call it indictment, I'm not giving it name, but I understand that the office of the Ministry of Finance have a representative in the CBN board, and that the monetary policy would have been discussed at the level of CBN board before even writing Mr. President seeking his approval for the policy.
Now, looking at the fact that the Minister of Finance is saying she was not in the know as regards when all of these policies were put in place, would you say that the process for which this policy came into being was more of a professional way of doing things?
As long as the CBN conceived the idea,
or sorry to say, or was it targeted mainly at some persons?
it is your choice of word to say whether it was targeted at some persons. But the issue is, what we are looking at is, do they breach any relevant section of the Constitution? And if they did, when in the wisdom of Supreme Court they decided to vary the policy, the CBN comply? The answer is yes. But again, if you want to get more clarity from the Honorable Minister of Finance, you can invite her on your program to give clarification on why she said she was not in the know. But what I can understand is, as far as I'm concerned, and say you educate me on this program, I think all the relevant government agents and parastatals will carry along.
All right. We're looking at the CBN governor's scorecard, actually, you know, as his tenure is coming to an end. Let us draw a comparison from, you know, the history of CBN governors that we've had in the past, Sanusi Lamido, Charles Soludo, and the rest of them. How would you compare, you know, these people, their performances to what we have recently with Emefiele?
I think looking at Charles Soludo, I think he's the one that was able to make our banks to recapitalize. I think it's a major area where he scored a good point. I think he did well. Then if you look at Sanusi, you know, under Sanusi, we had the issue of that policy where he said, if you are an MD of a bank, you have stayed 10 years, leave that position. And he came with the issue of non-performing loans, where you have to fire MD of so many banks. We talk of Intercontinental Bank, Oceanic Bank, where so many of them were prosecuted.
Yeah.
At that point, the CBN was telling those banks that the money you are using to do business is depositors' money, that you have eroded all the capital with which you floated these banks. As such, you cannot sit on the board as MD of these companies, of the banks. So I think that in a way strengthened the banks too. So he did well for me. Then looking at the current CBN governor, looking at the economic crisis and all of that characterize his regime, how he's able to navigate through, and the economy is not, though not in the best shape, but it's not in recession. I think he equally did well.
But looking at the Anchor Borrowers Fund,
you are asking me Anchor Borrowers Fund. I do not have the statistics as to who and who benefited and the total amount of money that was budgeted for it. So until we have that figure, we can do an appraisal.
but looking at it at the face value, especially in our agricultural sector, did it in any way reflect in terms of the prices of food?
To an extent, it reflected, because if you look at the local cultivation of rice, for instance, you agree with me that Nigeria have progressed in terms of cultivation of rice locally. And I think the credit goes to the Anchor Borrowers program. But again, I cannot do an appraisal because I do not have a holistic view in terms of the total money budgeted for it, who benefited, or whether some persons were saying that they approached the CBN for the fund and didn't get it, or there were sharp practices. Except you have somebody who is indicted, who is making an accusation. It's difficult for me to start making specifics.
What would you
statements.
say? What would you say about the trader money?
The same thing is applicable, but the only thing I can talk specifically about trader money is the government make it political at times. Because you agree with me that the time of in 2019 election, we saw an Oshibanjo almost in every market dishing out money in the name of trader money. After the election, he retired to Asurok. I think the same thing happened in the two elections that brought two of them to office.
Yeah.
Yes, I think they use it to play politics. But beyond that, looking at whether there was money embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, those ones can only be analyzed if you have the information. And it is very difficult for you to make allegation that you cannot substantiate.
Yeah.
That is the issue.
All right. Thank
Now
you.
let's look at the protest right about now. Do you think it is long overdue?
What?
The protest
Against?
the CBN.
I say it's political. Because what is source for the goose is source for the gander. If Mr. President gave the approval for the policy and Mr. President is the employer of the CBN governor is an employee of the Mr. President, I think Mr. President is equally involved in any indictment or whatever negative tendency that came from it. So I think people should be calling for the resignation of Mr. President if they are justified to call for the resignation of the CBN governor. For me, it's political. It's political because at this point, naira scarcity is no longer an issue. So why are you calling for the mass resignation? When we had the issue of naira scarcity, there was a day I was coming to studio here. I was going to Shagamu. I was going to Shagamu specifically. The road was barricaded. It was understood that there was scarcity. I knew government deployed military personnel, police personnel to disperse protesters. That is to keep normalcy. But it is understandable that their coming out of the street was justified. But now that CBN have complied with the order of the courts and they have recirculated old naira notes and scarcity is not a challenge. Somebody going on the street picketing CBN headquarters or their branches asking for the mass resignation is political. I can tell you that.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Matthew, for coming on the show this morning. It's a very eye-opening conversation we had. We appreciate your time. It is still iBrandTV Daybreak. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. When we return from this quick break, we will be joined by the Love Doctor for the people that are interested. Just keep your dials locked, don't go anywhere. Stay with us.